The first day on Corvallis 7 was nothing like he expected. The moment his boots touched the spongy, faintly glowing ground outside his new apartment, he realized that even gravity had its own peculiar sense of humor here. It tugged at him just enough to make his walk feel like a clumsy dance, as if the planet itself was testing his coordination. He stumbled over the hover delivery drones buzzing past, narrowly avoiding one that zipped by like an irritable wasp, muttering something that probably counted as a threat in drone language. The city skyline shimmered in hues that no Earth sunset had ever dreamed of. Spires that spiraled into the air, reflecting light in prismatic bands that shifted when he moved his head, and roads that glowed faintly beneath magnetic rails where levitating vehicles zipped in silent, graceful arcs. He had imagined he'd be awed by alien grandeur. Instead, he felt like a human cat on a floating treadmill, trying not to crash spectacularly. Settling into his apartment hadn't been any easier. His furniture refused to stay grounded, levitating in small, polite circles until he commanded it to stop. The refrigerator hummed in gentle protest when he tried to open it, and the kitchenware seemed to anticipate rebellion, flipping and twirling in midair with a grace that would have been impressive if it weren't slightly terrifying. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he cursed himself for thinking unpacking would be a simple task. At least the apartment view made it worth the mild chaos. The neon-lit city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board for a civilization that had clearly mastered both engineering and style. That evening, as he wrestled with a levitating grocery bag that seemed determined to escape his grasp, he noticed a figure across the corridor, his neighbor. She was striking in a way that made him forget what he was doing, even if only for a moment. Human at first glance, except for her long, elegant ears that curved upward and twitched with a kind of mischievous intelligence. She moved with a grace that seemed to defy the slightly whimsical pull of the planet's gravity. Her eyes were a pale violet, soft yet probing, and the faint curve of her smile suggested she knew more about him than he had yet revealed about himself. Before he could fumble a greeting, she was at his door, unannounced but somehow entirely expected, holding a small tray that floated between her hands without touching them. "Care for a proper introduction, or should I let your groceries escape into orbit first?" she asked, her voice lilting like a song with unexpected punctuation. He laughed nervously, dropping half the contents of the bag as if in agreement. "Maybe the groceries first," he muttered, scrambling to catch a jar that drifted toward the ceiling. She laughed, a sound that made his stomach do that odd, human fluttering thing, and her ears twitched again in a way he decided must be flirtatious, though it could have just been her species' version of amusement. She waved a hand, and the jar obediently floated back into the bag, as if she had simply called it home. "I'm Celira," she said, nodding toward herself, and then extended a hand, which in midair did a small, elegant spin that somehow made the gesture feel ceremonious. "And you are?" "A human, that's me. Name's Mark. I just moved in," he replied, feeling suddenly as clumsy as a toddler learning to use chopsticks in zero gravity. She raised an eyebrow, tall, elegant, and vaguely intimidating, and he realized he was being evaluated in ways that had nothing to do with standard human manners. "I can show you inside," she said, her ears flicking as if punctuating her offer with tiny exclamation points. "It's safer than wrestling your groceries with the apartment's furniture in revolt." Mark hesitated only a moment before nodding, mentally preparing for what he assumed would be a conventional neighborly introduction. Instead, as soon as he stepped into her apartment, he realized he had underestimated the planet's sense of humor again. The entire room was a symphony of soft levitation. Chairs floated at table height, a small tableware set circled in slow orbits, and walls shifted their hues gently with each step he took. It was like entering a dream in which gravity was polite but playful, and he was already a step behind. Celira guided him to a floating seat that turned toward him as though aware he might not be comfortable yet. "Don't worry," she said with a smirk. If you fall, I catch. Usually. Her ears twitched, and he realized she had delivered the joke with the precision of someone who practiced humor in at least 3 languages. He chuckled despite himself, grateful that someone here understood the oddity of his human awkwardness. She gestured to the hovering kitchen utensils, and he tripped over his own feet trying to catch a fork before it executed a perfect mid-air somersault. Celira's laughter echoed gently, her ears dancing in rhythm, and he thought that perhaps this was the secret charm of her species. Humor embedded in every interaction, even the mundane. He relaxed just a fraction, realizing that despite the alien oddities, there was something genuinely welcoming here. "Relax," she said, noticing his tension. "Gravity may be polite, furniture may revolt, but you're safe. And I promise the tea doesn't bite." Mark raised an eyebrow, uncertain whether to laugh or worry, and she only smiled, the violet glint in her eyes catching the soft ambient light. Somehow, despite all the chaos, he felt that maybe, just maybe, this strange planet could become a home. As he sipped the floating tea that hovered obediently in front of him, he realized that the visit had already begun to turn into an adventure. One misstep at a time, of course, but an adventure nonetheless. And with Celira at the helm, who knew how many floating mishaps might turn into stories worth retelling. Mark woke to a faint hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, the floor, and even the gravity itself. He opened his eyes to find a small orb hovering at the side of the bed, projecting a translucent holographic image of Celira's morning greeting. A smile that tilted sideways and ears twitching in a pattern that apparently meant "wake up, sleepy human." The orb bobbed slightly, like it had its own personality, which was unsettling when he remembered he hadn't signed up for sentient room accessories. "Good morning," it chimed in a lilting voice, as if expecting a witty retort. Mark mumbled something about tea, and it drifted toward the kitchenette, apparently taking his request as a command. By the time he shuffled into the main room, still half lost in a groggy fog, Celira was already perched on a floating chair, her long ears curling gracefully as she sipped from a levitating cup of steaming liquid. She tilted her head, watching him stumble toward the table. "You do know that humans have a habit of tripping over invisible things," she said, amusement lacing every syllable. Her ears twitched in rhythm with the soft hum of the furniture, which hovered obediently around them. Mark attempted a bow, tripping slightly over the hovermat that seemed to detect embarrassment and react by spinning gently. "I swear every day is a new skill to master," he muttered. Celira waved a hand, and a small device zipped from the countertop to hover in front of him, projecting a floating toast rack. The slices popped out like they were alive, landing neatly on plates that adjusted their tilt to accommodate low-gravity crumbs. Mark picked up a slice and nearly dropped it when a tiny puff of steam lifted it just out of reach. "Breakfast can be competitive," she said dryly, her ears flicking in mock seriousness. "It's part of the training." After a few attempts, Mark managed to eat without sending food into orbit. "I think I need a manual," he admitted. Celira leaned back, letting the seat rotate lazily. "No manual can prepare a human for proper domestic conduct on Corvallis 7, but you'll adapt eventually. Maybe." She smirked, and the corner of her mouth curved in a way that made him feel simultaneously welcome and hopelessly clumsy. Once breakfast concluded without incident, she floated to a panel on the wall and waved her hand. The apartment responded immediately. Shelves descended, utensils aligned themselves neatly, and a small garden of humming, bioluminescent plants drifted into the center of the room. "Welcome to my living space," she said with mock ceremoniousness. "Everything you see here is sentient to a degree. They are polite but very opinionated." A hovering plant swayed toward him, and a soft voice murmured, "Careful, human. Your boots might squish me." Mark blinked. Did the plants just talk? Celira's ears twitched as she laughed. "They do. Politeness first, insults later. We have a slow escalation policy." Mark wandered carefully through the apartment, touching floating objects with tentative curiosity. Cups rotated lazily in midair. Tiny drones hovered around, seemingly assessing his competence, and the library walls projected holographic books that hovered toward him if he showed interest. He reached for one only to have it dart upward teasingly out of reach. "They like games," Celira said, eyes twinkling. "You have to play along or they sulk." Mark groaned. "I didn't know furniture could have moods." On Corvallis 7. Everything has moods. That's why humor is mandatory. They spent the afternoon in a series of mild domestic disasters. Mark discovered that the dishwasher was sentient and mildly judgmental. The stove required verbal negotiation to start, and the small dessert drone decided to orbit his head after he attempted to taste a floating pastry without permission. Celira only laughed, her long ears flicking in amusement. "See, you're learning, you're not causing panic, you're amusing them. That's a first step." Each mishap was accompanied by small, precise explanations and jokes, which somehow made Mark feel less like a human out of place and more like a participant in a living, playful ecosystem. Eventually, Celira guided him to the garden of bioluminescent plants, floating gently in a circle around them. "These are my favorites," she said. "They respond to music and laughter." Mark clapped awkwardly, and the plants shivered in harmony, a soft melody emerging from their hums. He laughed at the odd sensation of literally conducting a plant orchestra, and Celira joined him, her ears twitching to the rhythm. Humor had become a bridge, a way to navigate the quirks of this strange, playful world. As evening approached, she floated toward a window, gesturing toward the city outside. Neon spires reflected off the clouds in waves of color, magnetic rails carrying silent trains that twisted like ribbons through the skyline. "The city has a sense of humor too," she said. "Notice the loops. They make human newcomers dizzy, intentionally." Mark winced but laughed anyway, realizing she was right. Every aspect of her world seemed designed to provoke wonder, missteps, and ultimately amusement. By the time he left her apartment, he was exhausted, exhilarated, and inexplicably happy. Each levitating object, each playful mishap, had become a lesson in patience, curiosity, and humility. Humor had softened the strangeness, transforming potential anxiety into a series of tiny, delightful surprises. Celira waved as he stepped into the corridor, her long ears catching the soft light of the corridor panels, framing her face in a way that made him momentarily forget gravity, technology, and protocol. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, voice light but teasing. He nodded, realizing he was beginning to look forward to the chaos, the laughter, and her company more than he had expected. The first day had been a test, the second a lesson, and now he understood that living here would mean learning to dance with a world that refused to stay grounded. But with her, at least, it was a dance worth attempting. Mark woke to the soft hum of the city below, but today the hum felt different, almost like it was waiting for him. Celira had sent a small orb floating to his bedside, its pale glow pulsating in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. It projected her face, eyes twinkling, ears curling with that same mischievous precision. "Ready to see the city properly?" she asked, and Mark realized he was grinning before he even had a chance to answer. The thought of adventure no longer caused panic, it caused anticipation. By the time he reached her apartment, she had arranged their gear, or rather, the apartment's gear had arranged itself, into something resembling a travel-ready setup. Magnetic boots hovered near the door, lightweight cloaks adjusted to low gravity, and a cluster of tiny levitating drones buzzed around, probably preparing to follow them. Mark stumbled over a rogue drone, laughing as it zipped out of reach, and Celira's ears twitched in amusement. "I see some habits are hard to break," she teased. He raised an eyebrow. "At least I'm consistent," he said, and she laughed, the sound weaving easily into the soft hum of her floating home. They stepped outside, where the city was already alive with movement. Magnetic rails zipped silently past, carrying vehicles that left light trails like ribbons in the sky. Floating gardens spun lazily above plazas, and holographic signs morphed continuously into new shapes and colors. Celira took his hand, gently guiding him along a path of glowing stepping stones that seemed to anticipate his weight, tilting to support him. "You're getting better," she said. "Yesterday, you nearly catapulted yourself into orbit." He snorted. "Progress takes time," he replied, and she shook her head with mock exasperation, ears flicking like delicate fans. Their first stop was the levitating gardens, a network of suspended flora that hummed in harmony when touched. Celira demonstrated how a plant responded to sound, making a playful series of notes with her voice. Mark tried to replicate it, producing an off-key squawk that caused a nearby plant to shake violently, flinging a small cluster of glowing berries in his direction. They both laughed, his initial embarrassment dissolving instantly under her amused gaze. Humor, he realized, had become a survival tool here, a way to navigate the unexpected and make mistakes feel like part of the adventure. Next, they boarded one of the magnetic rails, sliding along the twisting, looping tracks that wound through the city's skyline. The speed made Mark squeal at first, then laugh uncontrollably as Celira made exaggerated commentary about the human screamometer. She claimed measured bravery. Along the journey, they exchanged stories about their worlds, teasing each other over minor cultural misunderstandings. He admitted how strange and lonely moving to a new planet had felt, while she confessed that curiosity often got her into situations she didn't entirely plan for. Though, in her case, the situations usually involved playful chaos rather than furniture revolts. They paused on a platform overlooking the city as the twin suns of Corvallis 7 began to set, casting a cascade of violet and gold across the towers. Celira's long ears caught the last rays, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Mark noticed how different everything felt now. He no longer stumbled on low-gravity surfaces, no longer felt flustered by floating obstacles. He had learned patience, observation, and the quiet joy of discovering a new world with someone willing to guide him. He had even learned to laugh at himself, an accomplishment he might never have claimed on Earth. "I think you're finally starting to enjoy this place," Celira said softly, nudging him gently with a hover-gloved hand. "I told you adventure isn't about surviving, it's about noticing the small absurdities and enjoying them." Mark nodded, letting the truth of that settle in. "You're right. I've spent years moving cautiously, worrying about every step. Here I'm, alive in ways I didn't expect." He smiled at her, seeing her ears twitch in affirmation. Their final stop was a small, floating amphitheater in the city center where performers of various species showcased gravity-defying acrobatics. Mark tried a trick he would never have dared yesterday. Leaping between small hovering platforms, arms outstretched, laughing when a minor miscalculation sent him spinning slightly before he caught himself. Celira clapped, cheering, and the plants in her floating garden seemed to hum in unison with their laughter. He felt a sense of mastery, not over the planet exactly, but over his fear of missteps, a realization that he could navigate strangeness with curiosity rather than trepidation. As night settled, the city glowing in its iridescent rhythm, they returned to her apartment. Floating tea hovered before them once again, and for the first time, Mark didn't feel the tension of novelty or the awkwardness of missteps. Humor, curiosity, and patience had transformed him. The human who had arrived feeling out of place was now a participant in the world's dance, attuned to its quirks and rhythms. Celira's eyes reflected his realization and she smiled knowingly, ears flicking gently in contentment. "I think we make a good team," she said. Mark nodded. "I think we do. You, me, and maybe the furniture." She laughed, ears quivering, and he joined her. The city's lights shimmered outside the window, and he felt the warmth of connection, not just to Celira, but to the strange, beautiful planet itself. The adventure had begun with a simple neighborly invitation, but it had grown into a journey of laughter, discovery, and transformation. As he finally prepared to rest, Mark realized that he was no longer the cautious newcomer he had been. He was part of this world now, capable of embracing its unpredictability, savoring its humor, and finding companionship in the unlikeliest of places. Celira's presence had been the bridge, and in crossing it, he had crossed a threshold within himself. They exchanged one last look, ears flicking in silent agreement, and the hum of Corvallis 7 became a lullaby that promised more adventures, more laughter, and the quiet joy of truly belonging.